Today on ILX Autos, we are out here taking a look at the 2015 Honda Civic Si. Now, because the 2015 Civic will be replaced very soon by the brand new 2016 Civic, this video will be a little bit shorter than our usual videos. The other reason for that, of course, is because I have already taken a look at the base Civic, and so you will find a detailed review on that vehicle on my channel as well. Now, in case you didn't know, the SI version of the Civic is the sporty version of the Civic. So we get some slight tweaks to the front end, to the back end. We, of course, get a tweaked suspension, different tires, different wheels, and a different engine under the hood. The other thing you need to know is that there really is only one direct competitor to this Civic Si, because this is the sedan form, and that really would be the Jetta GLI. The reason, of course, is because Ford does not make a sedan version of the Ford Focus RS or the ST. When we start taking a look at some of the other inexpensive sporty vehicles in this particular segment, the vast majority of them are two-door coupes, so vehicles like the Civic Si would compete with that in two-door coupe form, but again, the version we're taking a look at here is the four-door sedan. The big thing you'll notice from the side profile first off is this large spoiler right here on the trunk lid. It does make the car look a little bit boy racer. Overall, I think that the Civic Si has a very good form for a sporty compact sedan because it does have this sort of wedge-like profile going towards the front. Now, at 179 inches long, this is a little bit shorter than something like that GLI, but it is a decent amount longer than the Ford Focus ST. It's about 8 inches longer than the hatchback version. Even if you're taking a look at the regular Ford Focus sedan, that is a little bit shorter than the Civic. Most of the extra length in the Civic goes right here to the back seat because this does have one of the most accommodating rear seats in this compact sedan segment. Out back, you'll notice that we get this very large single exhaust tip down here. We get some slightly different treatment at the bottom of the bumper. Again, here's another view of that very large spoiler. Now, one of the changes that's been made to the Civic over the years is that we have a slightly different trunk lid and rear tail lamp arrangement than when this generation of Civic first launched. When this generation of Civic was launched, Honda was accused of making it look a little bit too cheap, and therefore we had lamps that were only here on the body, none on the trunk lid. So Honda had a few years where they made changes to this vehicle incrementally every year, to the interior, to the exterior, tweaking it to try and make it a little bit more premium, and that's what we finally have right here in the 2015 model year. Although many vehicles in this segment are now using turbocharged engines, Honda has stuck to a tried and true 2.4-liter four-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. This produces 205 horsepower at a lofty 7,000 RPM and 174 pound-feet of torque. Now, the two important things to know are that this is mated to a 6-speed manual transmission only. There's no automatic version of the Civic Si. And the second thing really is that 7,000 RPM. In order to get 205 horsepower out of this engine, you do have to rev the nuts off of it. Now, the reason I mention that is because this has a very different driving dynamic than those turbocharged engines that do produce an awful lot of their power at much lower RPMs. It also behaves quite differently than Acura's ILX, which is actually related to the Honda Civic, but it actually uses a completely different 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine, and it produces its horsepower and torque at much lower RPMs. Front seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. We do have a relatively comfortable driver's seat, but we don't have any adjustable lumbar support of any kind. Now, that said, Honda does give you slightly more aggressive lumbar support standard in their seat design, so if that's not something you like, you should keep that in mind. We also have more aggressive bolstering than we find in the regular Honda Civic. Now, we still have a tilt telescopic steering column that is manual and offers a moderate amount of range. Rear seat comfort comes in at 9 out of 10 points. The Civic has a very accommodating rear seat. Now, I do wish these door openings were a little bit larger because, as you can see, it is relatively easy to bop your head right there, but I still have an adequate amount of headroom even sitting upright in the back. Now, that is especially notable because a lot of vehicles in this particular segment don't give you this much headroom unless you get the hatchback, and this is the sedan. There's even enough room if I sit right here in the middle to actually sit upright again, and just my hair is brushing the ceiling, my head's not actually touching the ceiling. Going all the way over to the right, the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and I still have about half an inch of legroom left. As opposed to some vehicles in this segment that have a 100% folding rear seat, this vehicle does have a 60/40 folding rear seat. We don't have a ski pass-through, but we do have a soft padded center armrest and 2 cup holders in the back. When it comes to the ILX Autos exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to give this 9 out of 10 points. It misses 10 out of 10 points because we don't have levers to recline the rear seat backs both on the inside and in the trunk. They're just back here in the trunk. And we also don't have a handle on the trunk lid to help you close it. But the trunk is quite large for this particular segment. That does help us get 9 out of 10 points. On the inside, we have two-way adjustable headrests and height adjustable seatbelts for both the driver and the front passenger. The SI model has unique seats with SI embroidered right there on the red and black fabric. Moving over to the doors, we have a majority of soft touch plastics in this generation of the Civic. So we have a soft touch upper portion here with faux stitching, fabric, and a soft touch armrest right there. The rest of the plastics you'll see are all hard. When this generation of the Civic was launched, a few people complained about the plastics quality on the inside, so Honda has made several changes to this interior over the years. We now have this soft touch injection molded portion right here with faux stitching going on, and then we have a very large glove box below that. The plastics on the dashboard have also changed since this model was introduced. The recently announced 2016 Civic will be a pretty big departure from what you're seeing here, because this still has the two-tiered dashboard. So up here we have our display for our speedometer. We also have our fuel gauge and our IV Tech display right over here on the left that tells you about how close you are to needing a shift. We have this small LCD, and then we have the larger LCD right here in the center console. Right in front of the driver, behind the steering wheel, you can barely see it right there, is the tachometer. Now working our way down the center console, our particular model has the optional navigation system. This touchscreen also gives us a backup camera and the Honda Lane Watch system. Below that we have a single zone manual climate control system, and then moving further down from that, you notice we do have our HDMI input and a USB input. The HDMI input is used not only to display whatever you want on the screen, but also for the Honda Link integrated apps, including navigation if your vehicle doesn't have it by default. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of the screen. You'll be taken on over to our detailed review. Behind that we have our 6-speed manual transmission shifter. As you can see, reverse is all the way over to the right and then down, which is my preference instead of all the way over to the left and then up. There's also no gating mechanism involved in there, so we don't have to press a button or push down on anything in order to get it in reverse. Continuing behind that, we have our handbrake and then two very large cup holders. From this angle, you can better see the pattern that's going on in the fabric in the SI model. We have this softly padded center armrest. It is fabric covered, and then it opens to reveal a relatively large console right there for a compact car. You can see I have some antacids in there. We have another USB port hidden away in here. This is the one that I prefer to use, of course, because it means that you can put your phone inside this compartment or your iPod or whatever it is that you're using. Now back over on the driver's side, we can take a closer look at this instrument cluster. Again, we have that two-tiered affair. That's why things are a little bit out of focus on the bottom of your screen. So you have that speedometer up top, and then we have this multifunction display on the upper right side of your screen. It's controlled via this button bank on the steering wheel. We move through that using that button. We have a clock, we have our audio video information right there, fuel economy, and then we have this dedicated screen unique to the SI model, which tells you how much power you're using. There's also a menu button, so you have a dedicated vehicle menu there, so you can change a few different vehicle settings as well as your trip computer settings. Now continuing out from that, we have a 3-spoke leather-wrapped steering wheel. We don't really have very large sport grips in the SI model, so we do have some bump outs there, but otherwise it's relatively round and relatively smooth. We have our cruise control buttons over here on the right side of the steering wheel. These buttons control the AV system as well as that multifunction display. So you have that menu button, that change button, track forward, backward, source, volume up, down, and then we have our dedicated phone hang up, pick up, and voice command buttons right down here attached to the steering wheel. Now if we rotate this steering wheel around, you'll notice on the turn signal stalk, this button turns on and off that lane watch system. It will also activate automatically if we simply turn the turn signal on to the right. Now the Honda Civic Si is not a fast car, it is a quick car, and there is a difference, because I would call fast 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, somewhere around there. Quick is in this 6-second range. This ran from 0 to 60 in 6.6 seconds, which is actually a little bit slower than Acura's ILX. Now the reason for that, of course, is that the ILX uses an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission, and it has a more advantageous horsepower and torque curve. Now because this Civic now competes with a wide variety of turbocharged options out there, I'm going to have to give this a B when it comes to acceleration. You will go faster 0 to 60 in something like a Volkswagen GTI, certainly faster in a Ford Focus ST, but there is something interesting about the way that the Civic Si goes from 0 to 60. This is a naturally aspirated engine. You do have to rev the nuts off of this engine in order to get it to go from 0 to 60 that fast. And there is something entertaining about revving an engine all the way up to 7,000 RPM before you shift. Also different in terms of behavior is when this vehicle torque steers. Because it is front-wheel drive, even though we do have a limited slip differential, you will still get some torque steer. But you don't get it right off the line. You get a little bit of wheel spin right off the line, but then the torque steer actually starts happening right around 5,000 RPM or so. Now all the other turbocharged engines, all of their torque happens down around 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, and that's really when you're going to get the torque steer over there in those other vehicles. The braking score in the Si differs greatly depending on what tire selection you have. If you get the base tires, then we ran from 60 to 0 in 128 feet, and that's the model we have right here. If you choose the option with the summer tires, then it does go about 10 feet shorter. In this particular category, I'm going to give this a B because these tires are not terribly wide, and you will find a number of vehicles out there that will go from 60 to 0 in shorter distances. Now, of course, that does raise up to about an A if you do get the summer tires, or obviously if you choose aftermarket tires after these tires are shot and you do replace them with grippier tires than came with the car. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give the Civic Si an A-. Now, the handling feel is absolutely excellent in this vehicle. The steering rack is very precise. It actually is a decent amount of steering feel coming from the front. However, you will go around corners faster in some of the competition, most notably that Ford Focus ST, certain versions of the Jetta GLI. It really depends on what the tires are on the vehicle. Now, the one thing that surprised me about the Civic is that the ride is not as harsh as many of the sporty competitors out there. I'm actually going to give this an A- when it comes to the ride. This suspension is not rock hard like you find in some of the competition, again, most notably that Ford Focus ST. It can be quite harsh out on the road. Certain versions of Volkswagen's GLI and GTI can also be very, very firm. Now, this is not going to be as soft as something like a Kia Forte Coupe, depending on the trim that you get, but it actually is fairly well composed. The suspension occasionally does get a little bit upset over broken pavement, and I think that's down to the suspension tuning in this particular vehicle. Now, I have to say that Acura's ILX, even though it is related to this vehicle, does have a more composed ride out on the road. The reason for that is it does have a two-mode damper system. The dampers have a small valve and a large valve in them, and it allows it to adapt to a variety of different road conditions. It allows you to have a sort of sportier feel out on the road without feeling overly crashy over large imperfections. Now, cabin noise obviously is something that any vehicle in this compact category has a problem with, and we did come in at 73 decibels in this particular cabin, which is pretty average for the compact sedan category in general. Obviously, you'll find a quieter cabin in some of those vehicles out there, but generally that would be the more expensive one. So something like that Acura ILX, which is sort of a sideways competitor to this, certain versions of the Mazda 3 perhaps, they will be a little bit quieter. Now, because the SI is available only with this 6-speed manual transmission, fuel economy is not as good as it could be. I've been averaging about 26 or 27 miles per gallon over this week in about 700 miles of mixed driving, and that is lower than you'll find some of the automatic transmission vehicles out there. The important thing to keep in mind here is that the era of manual transmissions always giving you better fuel economy is actually over these days. Many times the automatic transmission will actually be the more economic choice. Now, of course, I do realize that the Civic Si does not have an automatic transmission, but I can hope that one day that 8-speed dual clutch transmission from the Acura ILX makes its way down here into the Civic. Out on the road, the Civic Si reminds me an awful lot of the Subaru BRZ or Scion FRS. Obviously not because this car has a rear-wheel drive driving dynamic, because it doesn't. This is a front-wheel drive compact sedan, but because of the way that it feels pure, it feels light, it feels like you're very much in command of the vehicle. Now, those vehicles have that same sort of feeling in a rear-wheel drive form, and this has those same sort of feelings in a front-wheel drive form. Compared to other vehicles out there, like a Mercedes-Benz CLA 250 or an Audi A3, that are front-wheel drive that obviously handle incredibly well, they feel a lot heavier, a lot more isolated than the Civic Si, and the Si has more of a raw feel to it. There are really only 3 ways the Si sedan comes. You can either get the base version, you can get the version with the summer tires, or the version with navigation that we're taking a look at here. That places the Si right in the middle of its competitive set. Something like the Ford Focus ST comes only in a hatchback form, only with a turbocharged engine. It produces 252 horsepower, which is more than this, but it will set you back a little bit more as well. $24,425 is where that starts, and of course, to configure it similarly to this, you are going to be a little bit more expensive. Of course, it will have considerably more power, and it's going to be a decent amount faster than this as well. Perhaps the most direct competitor would be Volkswagen's Jetta GLI, because it's the only vehicle that actually comes as a sedan like the Civic Si does. It also produces about the same kind of power. It's 210 horsepower, so it's not that much more than the Si that we're testing here. On the flip side, however, that GLI does use a turbocharger, so its power and its torque figures come on much lower than this, and it's going to definitely feel a little bit peppier. You don't have to rev that GLI as high as you do the Si in order to get that power out of it. Now, that said, revving the nuts off of the Si is part of the enjoyment. The other part of the enjoyment, of course, for this vehicle is its price tag, because it is significantly less expensive than that Volkswagen. The Volkswagen goes from just under $27,000 to a hair under $30,000. Of course, the discount entry in this segment would be the Scion TC, but it is just a 2-door coupe, so it really competes more directly with the Civic coupe. It only produces 179 horsepower, so it's a lot less powerful than we're taking a look at here, but it is less expensive. It's $20,180, and it really only comes two ways, either manual transmission for that $20,180 or a little bit more for the automatic transmission. There are no options over there at Scion. So how does the SI stack up against those three competitors? Well, versus the Volkswagen, this feels a little bit lighter and a little bit more nimble. The Volkswagen feels a little bit more Germanic, a little bit heavier, a little bit less willing to turn, but the grip is actually slightly higher in the GLI. This vehicle is going more for handling feel, handling precision, than absolute outright grip numbers. Now, Volkswagen has not yet put their new GTI engine in the GLI, which means that it doesn't produce quite the same horsepower or torque figures as the Volkswagen hatchback does. Scion's TC only comes as a two-door coupe, but it actually feels a lot more like the Civic Si than the other vehicles in this particular segment. It has a direct and engaging feel to it. Its manual transmission does not feel quite as good as the model we're taking a look at right here. Honda makes a very, very good manual transmission in terms of feel, in terms of clutch engagement, just the precision, the way the shifter engages into each gear, the way the clutch engages. It's very easy to figure out where that engagement happens. It's very easy to drive this car. Now, on the downside, the Scion TC is getting a little bit old, and its interior does not feel as nice as the interior that we get in the Civic Si. And that is even considering that the Civic Si is due to be replaced in a very small amount of time with a brand new 2016 model, so that really should tell you how old the interior in the Scion TC is feeling these days. Then we have Ford's Focus ST hatch. The ST hatch is an absolute hoot and a half. It produces 252 horsepower and a whopping amount of torque from that turbocharged engine, and it's sending all that power through the front wheels. That vehicle torque steers like there is absolutely no tomorrow. This car torque steers, but generally only at the higher RPMs, where you're really wringing all that torque and all that horsepower out of the engine. Now, personally, I find torque steer to be part of the amusement factor that you find in this kind of vehicle. So I don't really think that the torque steer over there in the Focus ST or in the Civic Si is a problem. Ford allows you to configure that ST with more options than we find in the Civic Si. Again, this only comes in a few different forms, and there really isn't that much variation between the two. But Ford will let you customize your ST quite a bit more than this. However, you will pay more for your ST than you will for the Civic Si. The manual transmission over there in the Ford Focus feels a little bit less engaging. The engagement of the clutch isn't quite as nice. The transmission shifter doesn't feel as good as this Civic Si right here. In addition, the Ford Focus ST handles better, but it doesn't feel quite as accurate as the Civic Si. At $20,590 starting, we have the Kia Forte Coupe, which would compete with the Honda Civic Si in two-door form, not the version we're taking a look at right here. Now, it produces 201 horsepower, but it's not a dedicated performance model in the same way as we see the Civic Si. It's trying to be a fast vehicle in that segment for sure, but it's not trying to be as overtly sporty as we see here. So it's going to ride a little bit softer. The interior is going to be a little bit less special versus the regular Kia Forte Coupe. Same thing goes for the Hyundai Veloster. The Hyundai Veloster Turbo is $22,600. It's a three-door hatchback, uses basically the same engine as we find in that Kia, but the same thing's going on. It's not going to be quite as overtly sporty as we see in this particular model. However, I do think that Veloster does have a very attractive and very unique look to it. Now, in terms of interior refinement, I actually think that both of those vehicles do beat this Honda Civic. The interiors are newer. This interior is getting a little bit old, and we don't have the same kind of options that we find in the Kia or in the Hyundai. Now, of the vehicles that we've talked about so far, I would put the Civic Si in the middle of the pack. I would actually take the Ford Focus ST or the Kia Forte Coupe over this particular vehicle. The Hyundai Veloster Turbo is probably tied with this because I do appreciate the versatility of that hatchback format. Now, the Kia Forte Coupe, when properly equipped, has a nicer interior than what we're taking a look at right here, and the Ford Focus ST is just an absolute blast to drive. Now, for me, the bigger elephant in this room is actually a Honda product as well. It is the Acura ILX, because it starts at $27,900. Now, that is obviously more than the Civic Si that we're taking a look at right here, but $27,900 is actually right in the meat of this segment. In fact, if you're taking a look at the Volkswagen GLI, I would definitely get this before the GLI, but I would also take the ILX before the GLI, and the GLI is just about as expensive. The Acura ILX is very closely related to the Honda Civic, and you could look at it as sort of the luxury version of the Honda Civic. Now that's not unique to Honda and Acura, and it's not a bad thing necessarily either, because the Lexus ES is actually the luxury version of the Toyota Avalon, and the Lexus is probably one of the most popular luxury vehicles in the United States. Now when you compare the Acura and the Honda and you park them next to each other, they don't necessarily look that related, because the ILX does look more luxurious. It has a longer hood, a shorter windshield that's also more upright, so they made some major changes actually to the structure of the vehicle in order to convert it into an Acura. The interior is completely different, although some basic components are shared, and the back end of the vehicle is completely different. In fact, the Acura and the Honda share no sheet metal and no glass with one another. Once upon a time, the ILX and the Civic Si did share engines and transmissions, because last year there was an ILX with a manual transmission and the same 2.4-liter engine that we see over here in the Civic Si. But that's completely different this year. The ILX now only uses one engine. It's a 2.4-liter direct injection 4-cylinder engine, and it actually is not related to what we see in this vehicle, even though the power figures are relatively close. The biggest difference is that the ILX's engine produces all of its power and its torque at much lower and more usable RPMs. Now, whether or not that appeals to you tends to be a personal preference. Some people find this style very, very attractive, and some people prefer their power down there at lower RPMs. The biggest difference is that the ILX now uses an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. That dual-clutch transmission is lightning fast like we see out of the Volkswagen DSGs, but unlike Volkswagen's DSGs, it also is very civilized and has no problem with low-speed travel. Now the bigger difference, of course, for people that are after maximum acceleration is that we get a lower first gear ratio, and of course all that horsepower and torque is more available, meaning it's almost half a second faster than the Civic Si. The other reason that I really like the ILX is because I like a few more luxury gadgets and gizmos than we can find in the Civic Si right here. Now you can find some of these same luxury gadgets and gizmos over there in the Ford Focus ST or the Kia or the Hyundai, and they include things like active noise cancellation, blind spot monitoring, cross traffic, automatic climate control, LED headlamps, ambient lighting, power heated and leather seats, as well as 2-mode dampers. All of those features are available in the ILX, and basically none of them are available over here in the Civic Si. Active noise cancellation makes the interior of the ILX quieter than the Civic Si. Blind spot monitoring, cross-traffic detection, the available radar cruise control system, all those make that car a little bit safer, especially if you like those kinds of systems. The LED headlamps are brighter and a little bit easier to see at night. The ambient lighting makes the interior look a little bit snazzier, as do the power-heated leather seats. When it comes to sporty dynamics, the 2-mode dampers also make a big difference, because that ILX rides a little bit better than the Civic Si, but it handles very much like the Civic Si, and in some forms actually handles a little bit better than the Si. Obviously, the Acura will cost more than the Honda. It's going to be about $4,000 to $6,000 more than the Civic Si we're testing right here, but you will get between $5,000 and $7,000 more value and more features for your extra $4,000 to $6,000. That also includes a warranty that's about a year longer. That includes the powertrain and the bumper-to-bumper warranty. You'll also be stopping at an Acura dealer for a slightly snazzier brand experience, and of course it will have a luxury badge on the front. Acura's ILX is one of my favorite vehicles under $40,000 at the moment. It has incredible value behind it. And this year, with this generation of the ILX, they're also allowing you to add features like their radar adaptive cruise control and their autonomous braking system that will try and save your bacon if you don't respond. If you're looking for simply the best overall vehicle, I would actually say that would be the Acura ILX, and I would take that over all the other vehicles that we have mentioned so far. Now, the Civic Si is still a solid value in this segment. It's likely going to be much less expensive to own and operate than either the Ford or the Volkswagen. However, I still place it right around the middle of this particular segment. If you like the Civic Si, I would say wait for the 2016 model year. I think you'll like that Civic even better. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015 Honda Civic Si. Be sure and check out those related videos down there at the bottom of your screen. Click that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned for my 2016 Honda Civic review just as soon as I can get one on my hands. I'll see you next week.